My dad, I'll call him Arthur, was a doormat, a certified grade A, platinum-plated doormat. He was the kind of guy who'd apologize to the chair he tripped over. If someone cut him off in traffic, he'd assume it was his fault for not being visible enough. It was infuriating, especially growing up. He avoided conflict like it was the plague, and it left me and my siblings exposed to the full force of our mother, Evangeline's particular brand of crazy. Evangeline, or Eve, as she preferred to be called when she wasn't screaming at us, was complicated. That's putting it mildly. She was a black hole of need and manipulation, and Arthur, with his passive nature, became her primary source of fuel. She controlled everything, from the groceries we ate to the clothes we wore. She even convinced Arthur to quit his decent-paying job to become a stay-at-home dad, effectively trapping him and us in her orbit. Our house wasn't a home, it was a cage. Arthur did all the cooking, cleaning, and childcare, all while enduring a constant barrage of insults and demeaning comments from Eve. She emasculated him at every turn, chipped away at his self-worth until there was nothing left but a shell. And the worst part? He let her. He just took it. But that wasn't the half of it. Eve was a serial cheater. It wasn't just a fling here or there. It was a revolving door of friends, who often ended up spending the night. She flaunted these affairs, almost daring Arthur to say something, anything. He never did. He just retreated further into himself, a ghost in his own home. My extended family, bless their hearts, tried. My aunts, uncles, and grandparents saw what was happening. They staged interventions, pleaded with Arthur to leave, even offered him financial support to get out. But he was stuck, paralyzed by fear, obligation, or some twisted sense of love. He'd always say, "It's not that bad. She loves me, in her own way." It was that bad. And she didn't love him. She used him. What made it worse was when Eve turned her attention to us, her children. A sharp word here, a cruel remark there, and when we were kids, it built up and it was never enough for Arthur to say or do anything. She'd mock our appearances, belittle our dreams, and generally make us feel worthless. I remember crying to Arthur about something Eve said or did. He'd pat me on the head, tell me to forget about it, or even try to justify her behavior. "She's just stressed," he'd say, his voice barely a whisper. "You know how she is." No, Dad. I didn't know how she was. I just knew it hurt. As I got older, the injustice of it all started to sink in. The fact that my own father, the man who was supposed to protect me, wouldn't stand up for me against his wife's abuse. It was devastating. It created a wound that festered for years. When I turned 18, Eve wasted no time kicking me out. She said I was ungrateful and a burden. Arthur just stood there looking miserable and didn't say a single damn word. That was it. No goodbye, no hug, no offer of help. Just silence. I joined the Air Force almost immediately. I needed to escape, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that toxic environment. They stationed me on the other side of the country, which suited me just fine. The further away I was, the better. The Air Force wasn't easy, but it was a hell of a lot better than living under Eve's thumb. I found a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and a structure that had been sorely lacking in my life. But the damage was already done. I was a mess. Years of emotional abuse had left me with a crippling lack of self-worth, a deep-seated anger, and a whole lot of trust issues. I could have easily gone down the incel route, become another bitter, resentful guy blaming the world for his problems. Luckily, I had some amazing people in my corner, friends, mentors, and a therapist who helped me unpack the years of trauma. Therapy was tough. Facing the truth about my childhood, about my parents, was painful, but it was also necessary. I learned to identify the patterns of abuse, to understand why Arthur acted the way he did, and to start forgiving myself for not being able to change things. It took years, but I slowly started to heal. I learned to manage my anger, to build healthy relationships, and to find some semblance of self-respect. I started to build a life for myself, a life that wasn't defined by my past. Then, 2 years after I left for the Air Force, Eve left Arthur. Just like that, she was gone. She cleaned him out in the divorce, taking everything she could get her hands on. He was left broken, alone, and penniless. A year later, she died. Drunk driving, crashed into a tree. One of her friends was in the car with her. They both died instantly. I should have felt something, maybe sadness, maybe relief, but all I felt was nothing. Well, that's not entirely true. I felt a dark, twisted sense of satisfaction knowing that it took her hours to die and she was surrounded by nothing but burning metal. That's when I realized I wasn't as healed as I thought I was. That's when I knew I still needed help to process things. That's when I started digging deeper into therapy. Fast forward to now, I'm almost 30. I have a great job, a stable life, and a girlfriend, Amelia, who is honestly the best thing that's ever happened to me. She's smart, kind, funny, and incredibly supportive. She knows all about my messed up family and understands the scars they left behind. I've learned to not allow myself to be consumed with anger and resentment by my past or so. I thought you'll see and instead put that energy to my future. I've maintained minimal contact with Arthur since I left home. As much as I try, I can't seem to make a real connection with him. The wounds are too deep, the resentment too strong. I see him at holidays, maybe a couple of times a year, but the conversations are always strained, superficial. We're strangers, bound by blood but separated by a lifetime of pain. Recently, I went to a family reunion. I almost didn't go, but Amelia convinced me. It's important to stay connected to your family, she said, even if it's difficult. So I went with Amelia by my side for support. It was awkward. The usual small talk, the forced smiles, the uncomfortable silences. I made a point of avoiding Arthur, sticking close to my aunts, uncles, and cousins who had always been there for me. I was chatting with my uncles, catching up on their lives, when I overheard Arthur talking in the background. He was talking about a coworker who was going through a divorce. The coworker had discovered that his wife was having an affair and was poised to get a very favorable divorce settlement. And then Arthur said something that made my blood run cold. He said that his coworker should try to forgive his wife and set a good example for unity and forgiveness. He even said, "I believe I set a great example for my son in that respect." I swear, it was like a switch flipped in my head. All the years of therapy, all the progress I had made, vanished in an instant. I was mentally transported back to being that rage-filled 18-year-old, desperate to escape the nightmare of my childhood. I turned to Arthur, my voice dangerously low. "Are you fucking serious?" He looked at me, startled, and started to stutter. I knew the next minute was pure word vomit, a torrent of pent-up anger and resentment that had been building for years. I can't relay it perfectly, but to sum it up, I unleashed on him. I shouted about how he was a pathetic father, a pathetic man. I told him that his own family knew he was a disgrace of a human being, that he would rather see his own son treated like shit than defend him because he was a fucking coward. I told him that no one would ever see him as an example to live by, that his wife would rather fuck half the neighborhood than even touch him, and that he should never, ever believe that anyone respected him. I started to derail, rambling between my shouting, my voice cracking with emotion. I saw the looks of shock and horror on the faces of my extended family. Amelia, bless her heart, quickly grabbed my arm and pulled me away. She drove me home, not saying a word. When we got back to the apartment, she just held me, letting me cry, letting me rage. "It's okay," she kept saying. "It's okay." Being away from Arthur, away from that suffocating atmosphere, made me feel instantly better. But I was also ashamed of losing control, ashamed of airing my dirty laundry in public, ashamed of hurting my family. I knew I needed to go back to therapy. This outburst proved that I still had a lot of work to do. I was nowhere near as healed as I thought I was. The reaction from my extended family was mixed. My one uncle said it was time for Arthur to hear it. My grandparents were pissed that I did that in front of everyone, with some saying that I should have done that behind closed doors instead of everyone seeing it. I don't care. I did what any sane person would do after an explosive family reunion. I posted about it on Reddit, threw it all out there, and waited for the inevitable firestorm. I got a lot of responses, ranging from supportive to judgmental to downright bizarre. One of the first comments I got was from a user named Mesmerizing Taylor who wrote, "It sounds like you finally got to express the pent-up feelings you've carried for so long. While the outburst wasn't ideal, it seems like it was a necessary step toward healing. It's good you're resuming therapy to process this further." That actually resonated with me. It was cathartic, no doubt, but definitely not the most appropriate way to handle things. Then there was a user named Never Too Much Thought who had a different perspective. "He sounds like a gentle, kind, and well-meaning person," they wrote. "You directed what is very clearly anger and resentment for your mother at him. It's a bit more complicated than being an asshole or not. You seem to have got some catharsis out of it, but I just don't believe he is the one you really wanted to scream at. And from the sounds of it, he was also a victim of your mother too. And while he was the adult and should have known better, he obviously didn't. Being non-confrontational isn't some character flaw. It's psychological, and he probably needs therapy himself. Screaming at him and demeaning him actually sounds like something your mother probably did, and I worry about you if that is something that actually made you feel better about yourself." That hit me hard. They were right. I was projecting my anger towards my mother onto Arthur. He was a victim too, albeit a passive one. But that didn't excuse his inaction, his failure to protect me. I responded to Never Too Much Thought, admitting that he was a victim of my mother, but adding, he was a victim who had a support system he never wanted to use. He fully let me be a victim my entire childhood because apparently it was too much effort to try and to this day doesn't believe he needs therapy. Never Too Much Thought replied, "All I can say is, based on your post and this interaction, is your anger is deeply misguided and you're failing to recognize the truly horrifying thing. You're behaving like the mother you actually should hate. Ouch." Double ouch? But again, they had a point. I was letting my anger consume me, turning me into the very person I despised. I responded one last time, "Oh, trust me, I fully hate her as well, but she is gone, and there is no use in holding a grudge against a dead person."